We'll be reviewing Section 2.9, which starts on page 62 in your manual, and we'll be going over examining and identifying barriers to homeownership. Essentially, this section will be talking about creating an action plan to help your client overcome those barriers, and a little bit on budgeting and setting up a spending plan. And then once we've completed that, we'll be moving on to the next section, which will be a discussion on making client notes in your file and how to do the appropriate follow-up for each client. So let's start with examining and identifying barriers to homeownership. As I said, much of this will be related to developing an action plan. We're also going to be talking about savings in this section and some of the barriers that our clients have to making a good savings. Biggest challenges that our clients have, but it's really important because savings is really critical to pursuing home ownership. The costs are going to be associated with home ownership can be, pretty significant. So they're going to have a down payment. They're going to have some upfront fees that they have to pay. There are going to be closing costs involved. In addition to the fact that savings is really important, when you're talking about home ownership, you're going to be responsible for maintenance and a lot more unexpected things than when you're in a rental situation. So it's important as a homeowner to have those savings reserves and to establish a savings account. So for all these reasons, it's very important to establish savings as one of the primary goals for our clients. Some of the strategies that we've talked about with our clients and that we can make suggestions for them, one of the really great ones that I use a lot is using PowerPay, and you can find this at powerpay.org. And it's just a way of showing them how they can maximize payments to pay off their debt more quickly. So it's not necessarily so much savings as it can be for paying off debts, but you can also use it for savings. They can set a savings goal, and then using PowerPay, they can set up steps to reach that goal. Some clients like to just use the good old-fashioned envelope method, and there's actually now applications and strategies to use virtual envelopes so they can take, and just kind of keep track of it using the envelope method without actually having envelopes and cash available. But that's one of the kind of tried and true methods for savings. They can pick different goals and just put each paycheck a certain amount in those envelopes. Sometimes a debit card can really be a savings sucker, because if someone's using that debit card and they are not keeping track of it and they're not being careful, they're not going to have anything left to save. So it's really important if they're using that debit card for kind of everything that they really sort of monitor what they're spending and what they're buying on that debit card. And sometimes if a client really cannot strategically control it, you might even say, we're not going to use the debit card for right now. We need to go to cash only so you can keep better track. Pay yourselves first. That's another tried and true, take your savings out first. Live on what's left. It really is, it's been around a long time, but that's because it works. We can help our clients determine their savings goals. I think sometimes the problem is usually it's either way too much and it's not realistic, or it's way too little, and they're not really pushing themselves to work hard to build up that savings account. So sometimes we can really help them adjust that to make sure that it's achievable and manageable, but also that they're working hard to achieve their goals. So we can help them set those savings amounts. Some of the other online budget tools, and these are just a few of them we have listed here. Probably my favorite on this page is Mint.com, and there's even an app that you can get on your phone to use Mint. So a lot of our clients now, and they're just using their phones for everything these days. So because Mint can be used as an app on your phone, I find that one to be very user-friendly. But take a look at all of these. They all have their pros and cons, and there's so many more out there, and they're being developed all the time. So we're constantly finding new virtual tools that could be used. Mint.com, I do believe they're the ones that have the virtual envelope system. So you'll find a lot of really useful ideas on here. And you might even give all these to your clients and let them come up with what they think is the most useful. Or they may already have something that they're using. In terms of budgeting, I mentioned in an earlier section that for budgeting purposes, we're using the net income. So I know previously we were talking about how to calculate gross income. And that's because for pre-qualification purposes or for qualification purposes on a mortgage, they're going to be basing that on the gross income. But the fact is, what do we have available to live on? How are we going to pay our bills? We're going to be using our net income. So what do we actually take home? So that's going to be what we're using for budgeting purposes. If your client management system is Counselor Max or Home Counselor Online, there's some pretty nice budget templates in there, or you can create your own. I think one really important thing is to have your clients take an active role. We do have to be careful, and the last note here is not imposing our own priorities when it comes to a client's budget, because it's really important that they take ownership of it. And one of the strategies that I've used after they tell me, okay, here's all the things that I spend money out on each month. And if we're going to try and reduce some things, one of the strategies I've used is just to turn it right back to them and say, what suggestions do you have? If you were in my shoes, where would you suggest that we make some adjustments? And that way they get kind of a free pass on, okay, I'll go ahead and make some comments. And, that's just kind of an easy way to go into it, because it is hard. Every client's going to have their own priorities in their budget when they set their spending plan, and it's really hard not to make assumptions or not to kind of push our priorities. So it's just really important to let them take the lead on that. When you develop the monthly budget, basically there's only 4 steps. Now these steps can get kind of complicated, but let's go through them. So the first thing is, what do we have coming in? How much do we have to work with? Let's figure out what your net monthly income is for the whole month, okay? Then we're going to make a list of all your monthly expenses. Let's figure out, what does it cost you to, pay all your bills, groceries, include everything in that monthly list. Then you're going to take a look and see, is there anything left? And that's when you're going to figure out what you want to do with step 4. If you've got a shortfall, well, either the number on top has got to get bigger, or the number on the bottom is going to have to get smaller. So either more money coming in or less money going out. And that'll be pretty self-evident to a client, because they'll see, wow, I really didn't realize that I was running that much short every month. So I think that, that bottom line is really going to be useful for them. Now, a couple comments here. I will tell you, be cautious if on paper it looks like a client has a lot of money left over. My experience is that you're probably missing a lot of monthly expenses. They've underestimated things. So that's pretty common too. So rather than just saying, oh great, you've got $600 a month that you can save, you might scale that back and say, well, why don't we just do half of that until we track your expenses for a while and have a pretty good handle on what you are spending. So I would just tell you, be a little careful here, assuming that the first time or even the second time or the third time you go through it, you're going to get complete accurate information. So it's going to require some adjustments. Developing an action plan for clients. We'll also finish this section by talking about documenting a client case. So let's start with creating an action plan. So the idea behind creating an action plan and the purpose is you really want to help the client to identify barriers that are keeping them from home ownership. Once you know those barriers, you can create a plan to move forward and move through them. So this is really going to be kind of your game plan and your strategy. And it really is going to help your clients see, okay, here's the issue and here's what I need to do to accomplish it. You want to try and be as comprehensive as you can. You can't include every little thing in action plans, but the more detailed they are, the better, because this is something that your clients really can follow as a roadmap to overcoming those barriers. And you should be able to create this in whatever client management system you're using, and it's usually the type of thing that you can create it throughout the course of the counseling session. So each time you come up with an idea that should be included on the action plan, you just go right ahead. It's kind of like a running total of everything that needs to happen. So this is traditionally something that you're going to be able to keep going, especially through that initial counseling session. Now, as you have follow-up appointments, it's just going to be something that you adjust as you go along, or you check things off the action plan so they can see what progress they're making. But the first time, it's really just kind of a running total of here's all the things that need to be accomplished to achieve your goal. Now, when you create the action plan, try to use just clear, concise language so that it's very, specific. Here's what you need to do. It's definitely not a place to keep a lot of your notes. This is for the client to take home and say, oh, that's right, I need to order my credit report. I need to start saving. I need to pay $10 extra on my credit cards. So you want to just be as concise as you can with very specific steps. We usually recommend that you even put dates on those steps. Within the next 2 weeks, I will obtain my credit card. Or the action plan in most client management systems is going to give you an option to go ahead and put the date in there. So it's really helpful for your clients to have just that extra little push to make those things and to get them accomplished. Make sure that the client gets a copy of it, and you also keep a copy in the file. Now what's really nice is if you can get them to sign it. If you're doing office appointments and you've got them in there, I would have them sign an action plan every single appointment, because that's going to be your buy-in that yes. And then I would have the counselor sign it too, because the action plan is also going to contain steps that the counselor is going to take. The counselor may be saying, I'm going to provide you with 3 different loan options, or I'm going to call you in 2 weeks and see how you're doing. So it makes kind of both of you accountable for the things that you're going to do. So although HUD doesn't require these to be signed, it's really important that you try to get them signed. And as I said, the last bullet point here, try and make sure you have some deadlines on there, or maybe some goals. Maybe not so much deadlines, but within the next X number of weeks or days, I'm going to do such and such. So you want to try and make it as specific as possible so they can really see if they're accomplishing what they want to. So what do you include in an action plan? What are some things that you might list here? You might list changes to income. Within the next 2 weeks, I'm going to apply for 2 part-time jobs. Or I'm going to check my withholding at work and reduce my tax withholding because I'm getting too big of a refund and I could use it now to pay off some debts. So you're going to have specific goals as far as debt and credit use. And this could even be something as simple as quit using the credit cards. Do not charge anything else. Go on a cash-only system. The budget will probably have specific goals. Very rarely are you going to have a client who has a perfect workable budget. There's almost always going to be some goals. And this could be things like, track spending for the next 2 weeks. Eat out only once a month. So you want to try and be as specific as you can here. As I already mentioned, put the counselor goals on there. My goal is to follow up with you prior to your next appointment. My goal is to help you obtain your credit report next appointment. So the things that you're going to promise to do, you want to put on there too. So each time a client completes the action plan, they're taking a step in the right direction. And some action plans, you can keep everything on there and then they just get checked off as they complete the items. Other action plans, the completed items drop off and then they just get kind of a shorter and shorter list. So either way, it's helpful for that client to have that roadmap on what they need to accomplish to move forward. And of course, this entire time, it's a work in progress because you're always going to be making adjustments, and they're hopefully going to be building their savings account, paying down their debts, and at this point they might also be participating in a group education course or something that your agency offers that will help them move ahead. Go ahead and help your clients prioritize how they want to do these tasks. So it might even be something as simple as giving them a range of time. So maybe for some things that are a little longer term projects, you can't say you're going to get this done in the next 2 weeks. But you can say within the next 1 to 3 months, I will have saved up X number of dollars. And then you can even break it down and say in order to accomplish this dollar goal, I'm going to have to save X number of dollars per paycheck. So you might even give them a couple short-term goals, a couple long-term goals, and a few mid-term goals in between. So sometimes it helps them see through the range of things, how are they going to get to those long-term goals? Well, they're going to work on their short and mid-term goals, and that's going to help push them forward toward achieving those long-term goals. This last section we're going to go over, I really just want to emphasize the importance of keeping good, accurate notes in your files. And I'll give you some examples of good notes and bad notes. So a couple things about note-taking. All notes should be placed in your client log as soon as you have them. So every time there's a new activity or you get new information, do it right away. The biggest problem I have run into when I do consulting work with agencies is you get busy, and so you put things off to the side. And then later on, your notes are not as complete as they would have been if you had done everything when it was fresh. So do contemporaneous note-taking. As you're doing the appointment, take your notes. So keeping good records means you're keeping on top of it, doing it as the activity happens. Always keep your records in your client management system, so that way if you're gone, or if you're audited, of course, those notes you have easy access to and anybody can take a look at it. And there's plenty of times that you may be out of the office and a client comes in and they have a question, and my answer is always, with the staff, if it's not in the notes, it didn't happen. So you've just got to make sure everything is documented. If there is a paper file, you want to be sure that you're keeping updated copies of the notes. And by the way, Post-its are not updated copies and do not count because they are not attached. So if you have a paper file, keep updating those notes in there. You also want to indicate in the notes when follow-up is projected to take place. So, next appointment set for 2 weeks. Or promised client I would follow up in 1 month. So keep track of that in your notes too, so anybody who has to take over your case or if you're out sick, they know what the next steps are and what needs to be done. Now, what do you include in your notes? Well, the good old who, what, when, and where. Okay? So who, make sure you note the client and any individuals that you talked with. If you called the bank, who did you speak with at the bank? What did they say? What department were they in? What's their extension if you have to call them back? So you definitely want to keep exact information about who you spoke with and what was talked, what was discussed, what was talked about. Did you send them information? Are they promising to send you information? So be as specific as you can. You're not really going to have to date your notes as long as you're doing them right away in your client system. And, Counselor Max, HCO, it's going to date it for you. But remember, I said the key here is doing it as it's happening. If you go in 3 days later to make a note, it's going to date it 3 days later. And then you're going to have to say, either adjust the date, or you're going to have to say, notes were not entered, this is what happened on appointment, X date. So of course, the best thing to do would be to just go ahead and document the notes on the day that they happen. You're going to keep track of any action items. Okay, so if client is supposed to send me pay stubs, you're going to say client is to send me pay stubs by such and such date. And again, that's going to be recorded on the action plan, but this is where you have a chance to take extra notes and maybe say this is a second request for the client to do this. So this is where you also put additional information. And then again, if you have follow-up that's been promised or specific things that you have promised you're going to take care of, indicate that. but always indicate kind of what your next step is. Step follow-up for 2 weeks out. Client is scheduled to call me such and such date or come into the office. So be sure that you've established when that future contact is going to be made. So here's an example of bad case notes. The system is keeping track of the date for us, but look at the note here. Scheduled client for class. Client intake. Well, client intake is the worst. Client intake, 60 minutes, and that's all you have to say about the client intake session. So, I mean, the first one's not too bad, scheduled client for class. But still, you spend 10 minutes, there's probably additional information you could have listed. But client intake, you spend an hour, and that's all you have to say. Not good. Here would be precise notes. Now, this particular note-taking system actually tells us, was it face-to-face? Was it over the phone? Can you bill it to a session? Who took, what time? How long did it take? But the notes are actually being typed in specifically. Review the loan docs, sent the Wells Fargo application to Lorena, so you even know where it went. Discussed insurance coverage. So you can see how anybody who just picks up this case file could pretty much take it and run. They would have an exact accounting of everything that the counselor has done on this particular client. So these are the type of notes that you want to see in your files. Full, complete information, specifics. Look at that last note there. Exact amounts. Really important to be as precise as you can. So this is what you want your notes to look like. Now, a couple things to remember after you complete an appointment. And still, this is going to be important documentation for finishing up your case file. So, first of all, make sure you put all your information in your client management system. As I said earlier, if it's not noted, if it's not documented, I'm sorry, it didn't happen. So make sure you're documenting everything. Keep copies of everything. Don't keep the originals, keep copies in there. As soon as that client file is created, you want to start keeping copies of everything. Enter reminders into your calendar for follow-up tasks. So don't just make a note of it in the client notes. Now it's going to be your job. Okay, I got to remember I scheduled this appointment. I told this client I would promise to do this. So make sure that you enter it into your personal calendar. Many of you probably use Outlook or Google Calendar or some other, maybe internal system. So however you do your reminders, make sure you put your triggers in there so you're going to be accountable for getting those things done that you promised, or making sure you're available if you've scheduled appointments. If you're using Counselor Max or HCO, that way you can assign the head number for it. And if it's an HCO system, you're going to want to be sure you're collecting 9902 information so that you can go ahead and make sure that everything's going to be billable. And really, whatever case management system you're using, you're going to want to be collecting that 9902 information and making sure that you have accurate case notes in every file. So a lot of this is really just going to depend on your personal preferences and how you have your system set up. And just make sure that you're doing whatever reminders you need to so that you can keep track of the promises that you've made and keeping everything documented in your system.